Hello YouTube and welcome back to the channel outside the target demographic. Last week I did a 1 month overview of using the SOG multi-tool, the power pint, and I feel there were a couple holes in the video. So here is part 2, the follow-up. Let's get started. I went through the modifications I made to it, how well the tool held up, and the fact that for me it fell flat. Probably wouldn't recommend for $30, probably decent enough, but I hope that my objective references and evidences were good enough to sway you one way or the other. So there were a few holes that I had left in there. Some of them were comparing it to the Victorinox, which I did some tool sets comparison, but one of the sentences that I had said is the tool sets are rather small or compromised in the SOG Power Pint, and we will get to why. And I never did, so we're going to be doing that today. The compromise comes in with the fact that this tool has to hide a rather large-sized plier head. With that large plier head, you can see it's about 5/6 of the length of the tool. Gives you two things. One, the tool is now in half. This is not one contiguous tool. This is not one contiguous tool. It is two halves that form one tool. So the implements are by definition going to have to be 1/2 the size that the footprint would allow it to be, if that makes sense. So the file can only be this wide, the blade can only be that wide, and the tools can only be this long, which I've pointed out in the previous video, or of diminished reach. I mean, that one's 1¼ inches, and that's because it has to fit the form factor of hiding a rather large plier head. If we look, that plier head is 5/6 the length of each individual leg. So in order for that plier head to disappear, your tools are going to have to compensate for it. And we can see here, even when they're folded up, the tool set is in a U shape, and that's to allow space for that large plier head. So they say these are a plier-based multi-tool, and they clearly are. To me, it is a marginal plier with reduced in name only tool set versus a pretty decent knife, as difficult as knives are to make, with a very nice accompaniment of actually functional, reachable, leverageable tools. So all that to say, when we get these back out, it is unfair, as I did in the last video, to compare these to the to the Victorinox. And I chose to do it anyways. So what I'm going to be doing now is, instead of comparing it to the Victorinox, we're going to compare it to the Victorinox. So this is something I realized as I'm going through looking at the tools. The individual tools on a 58mm Victorinox are comparable, if not better, and we'll put that in asterisks again. It is my intention to convince you of that fact, but I would say they're arguably better on this guy. And again, if we're going to get into the footprint versus tool set argument, these are intended for a keychain. We now cut 20-30% off the length of that tool. The width of that tool is comparable to just one leg. And the weight, of course, we won't even bother going into that. This literally disappears onto a keychain because it is designed to go on a keychain. Now, none of the 58mm will have a set of pliers, which is true. As we covered, the pliers on the Victorinox for my usages, which is not automotive, it is not construction, it is not fabrication, the pliers, the SOG is of course going to win. But if you have a 91 millimeter with a pair of pliers, I would say the majority of tasks. Again, not building a house or routing plumbing, you'd probably be perfectly qualified to do. So, all that to say, let's open this up. This is a 58 millimeter Midnight Manager. So there are a couple of tools that won't necessarily come into play here. It's not a one-to-one tool set comparison, but I'm just trying to show you how much you are compromising with, I'm going to say, the SOG Power Pint. And in the background, all the way over here, I'm going to say with Leatherman tools in general. Because this is not a SOG issue. This is a plier-based tool issue. So all of them, Leatherman, SOG, Chinese manufacturer of the day, whatever, they're all going to have the compromised tool set, the thinner tool set, the least reachy, less torquage tool set. So let's go ahead and jump into it. The scissors are almost the same length, or maybe 10-20% less, but let me put the rest of them away. If we put them next to each other, you'll start noticing some things. When we put the pivot on the pivot, the blade of the scissors is essentially the exact same length. The cutting edge of the scissors is the same length, even though this one is physically of smaller size and takes up smaller space on a smaller multi-tool. The other thing is, this one is limited to how far it will open due to its spring mechanism. This one is not. So not only does this one open wider and has a the same cutting length, but this one you can actually sharpen. How are you supposed to sharpen this? You cannot open that anymore. I cannot slide anything in there to sharpen the blades of that scissor. I may be able to go, the furthest half due to the way that this opens up just enough to maybe allow sharpening, but that wasn't even something I considered until starting this video. So these scissors that weren't of great quality to begin with are at the highest potential they're going to be. It is very difficult, if not impossible, or requiring special stones or sharpening solution to touch back up those blades. Versus this guy, they open up at a 90-degree angle, and I have in a couple times now on various Victorinoxes have been able to open the scissors enough to resharpen them up to a point where I have noticed that they are sharper and they do actually cut better. I say all that because I'm terrible with stones, but anyways. So not only do you have a better overall engineering design with a spring mechanism that allows it to open, with the availability to sharpen it, but it takes up less space and it cuts better than these that chop. Unfortunately, I don't have really anything here to show you, but I referenced if I was using like a drinking straw. As soon as I cut the straw, the bit that I cut that is not the longest part, I guess is the best way of saying that, is going to jettison into the next zip code. When I cut with this one, when I cut it, it just drops in place. So this one relies more on a chopping method, it would seem. And if we go into the thickness of the blades, I would say this one's maybe 20% less thick, which is probably the reason why this one will jettison the clippings while this one actually slices through. So overall, substantially smaller tool with a arguably better tool set. Again, you're sacrificing the pliers. So it comes into which one are you weighting the tool towards? Do you want something small that fits in a pocket? I got you covered. Do you want something that has pliers that punch above their weight? Well, guess what? I have you covered. So it depends on what you're doing. Just understand that we're not comparing this to the full-size Victorinoxes. We're comparing it to the keychain. Going to, let's see, the Phillips. Again, let's start with, you have 1 inch at most reach on that Phillips. Now it is a 2.5 dimension, and I don't know how well the light is going to show that, so I am going to try my best. But it is of a rectangular shape versus a square shape, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. So in my findings, compared to the Phillips of the 91 Victorinox, this one, if it seats into the screw, will stay seated in the screw. The SOG, when I put it in, there's wobble both left, right, and up, down. So less engineering went into that, I suppose. And you can see this one has to be thin in order to allow it to slide against those other tools. This one actually beefs up. You can see as it gets towards the head, that the head has swollen up to provide you better fitment. And we're going to let that joke land. Back to this guy. On the keychain, Victorinox, we're 1 3/4 inch reach. And, they're comparable, I'd say. This one still seems more squared off. Rectangular versus this one that is squared off. This one's also magnetic, for what that's worth, if that's something that you need. But just looking at the reach of it, that's almost twice as long. In addition to, not only is this one longer, but it provides you a wire stripper and a cap lifter. So this is, right off the rip, 3 times better than the SOG is. It has 3 more tools. Anyways, so as far as the engineering is concerned, the SOG kind of phoned it in, is I guess what I'm going to be trying to get to on that. But we have double the reach, we have a magnetized tip, and the other thing was, this guy will stay narrower longer throughout the entirety of its shaft, versus this one that swells up pretty quickly over a much shorter shaft. So if I'm trying to get the batteries out of a kid's tool, or reach into the recesses of a computer to remove a screw to get to the hard drive to destroy protected health information or something to that effect, I'm compromised, I'm marginalized, I'm maybe less likely to be able to do the task that is required of me with the tool that I'm carrying on me. It is a compromise. So I've actually, in the month that I've been using this one, had to have taken this one off of my keychain regularly, more so than when I'm carrying the full-size Vic, to use the smaller keychain tool set that's actually arguably better than the 8 times heavier, 3 times larger footprint multi-tool that I'm carrying. It's just the engineering, it's just the trade-off. So there's a reason that I'm not a fan of the plier-based tools. The pliers are great. The pliers are not really needed in my life. And the trade-off for literally everything else, the remainder of the tool set, is just not conducive for what I need. So that's what I'm trying to get at with that one. If we go to this one, is the cap lifter. And here again, you'll notice I don't have to switch tools on the Victorinox. It's already at that cap lifter thing. The cap lifter, by being a lifter, being a pry apparatus, is going to need a larger amount of leverage in order to do its task. This one is already larger. The leverage point is further away from the pivot point. And if we line those up, I'm the width of a finger less than this substantially larger, heavier multi-tool. So the leverage is almost there. And the thickness of this tool is double compared to the SOG. So you have the leverage, you have the thickness, which is, in theory, going to allow you to pry up harder on something longer with less likelihood of breakage. On a keychain tool? All right, so when we go to the file, When we go to the file's going to be bigger. Arguably, the aggressiveness of the tooth count and the way that they cut it. When I file my nails, which is mostly what I'm using that file for, it's less aggressive. I find it will smooth, but it doesn't necessarily remove material, which as a metal file, one would assume it would be capable of. But all that to say, you can really only use up to here, and then you have a compromised surface area, right? Because of the thumb hole right here, you really only have that big of a file. If we compare those two, it's 1-to-1. But we'll give it the full length there. What I will say is this one's more of a square. It has a frame around it. And as you get closer to your pivot point, there is a smooth portion there. To be fair, to that being fair, I can't really run my nail up against the tool and expect to be filing in that smooth spot, right? So they have it where it's halfway across my thumb as I hit that hard stop against the tool. But all that to say, they did carry it a little bit further, the cross-hatching, the cuts on the file of the SOG here. But I feel there's not really much of a compromise on this. Now, it doesn't have the metal saw like this one does. It does work. As I said, I did have a thin PC chassis. As I was getting to a hard drive, the side panel of your PC that comes off, it's a 1/16 of an inch. I don't know. I didn't measure it. But I was able to score into that metal. I did not continue cutting. I have been able to do very prominent cuts in like cookie sheets and thin metal like that, sheet metal, with the Victorinox saw. But that's what you have there. Going to the flathead screwdriver. Here again, I could just leave this tool out because they've doubled up the capacity of the tool sets. This is a 2-in-1. Arguably, it should be a 3-in-1. Victorinox will have one of these implements that comes out and it's like 1.5 inches and in metric, a ruler. Why they can't put that on this side, or more appropriately, put this file on the side with the nail nick and not sacrifice the validity of that measuring device, I don't know. But all that to say, look at the size of this flathead. It's 25-30% wider than this precision one. Now, this is supposed to be a higher quality metal, and honestly, I'm not really seeing it, but that has just as much to do with the finish as it has to do with the metallurgy. But you have a wider, thicker head on that screwdriver. And then again, if we look here, if I have the Victorinox touching against the SOG is just barely not making contact with the Victorinox. So all that to say, this is slightly longer than the longest implement, not a knife, not a main blade, on the SOG. And then again, we get into right here, the thickness of the shank of the shaft of that jeweler screwdriver is going to step up past the point of a keychain multi-tool that may or may not be enough for you to reach deep enough into a tool a toy, a chassis, a project, a piece of electrical equipment, whatever, to be able to access that screw, because you're going to, instead of bottom out, you're going to top out, and the physical recess hole in that piece of plastic is not going to allow the screwdriver to mate with the surface and unscrew. So it doesn't stack up, as I guess what I'm getting at. I feel like I've made that point a couple times, but here we go again. We did the scissors, we did the multi-tool. Now we're down to the blade. The blade is going to be cutting edge, probably 75% of the substantially heavier tool. Now, this again is a double-edged because we're talking about knives. This is a double-edged insight, revelation, justification. You're going to have a larger blade and you're going to have a larger handle that fits in all 4 fingers to manipulate that blade. Versus this one, it's only going to go into 3 fingers, right? Probably not going to choke up on a blade of this size and, more importantly, of this fragility. Let me see if I can... So I'm going to line it directly up with this number 5 line. You can see there's quite a bit of wobble in that. And that is not flexing of the metal. That is wobble at the hinge point. I feel like I made that point in the other video. But that is also the wobble at the hinge point of all of the tools. So the quality is not there compared to a 125-plus-year-old Swiss manufacturing, Swiss quality. Of course, this shouldn't be a revelation, but it is something I'm trying to make sure that you, a potential buyer or multi-tool aficionado user, would be more aware of, because I feel like, especially the wobbly hinges, I don't know that I've read anything about that on any of the even scathing reviews of the SOG. But all that to say, I feel like once you get into a small enough blade like this, you're going to be using it for smaller cuts, not necessarily full handing it, trying to cut down a tree or shave a stick or something like that. So the smoothness of the handle, as it were, I feel instills a little bit more confidence than a wobbly blade, a larger blade on a larger multi-tool. Feels like the middling ground, in as much as it is a compromise between the two. This is a much larger blade on a much smoother, larger bodied handle that I've never felt under-equipped with. This one would be the micro version of that, and this one is some property in between the two, where it is neither a large blade nor a ergonomic handle nor the size that I would require. It's hard to explain on that one, but turns out the substantially larger, heavier multi-tool has a larger blade than the Victorinox. Who would have known? In its favor, I will say that, again, 100% of the edge is an edge. 100% of the side is the blade. Versus this one has, I forget what it's called, but right here, you have a not even sharpened portion. I don't know if that's a safety, so you don't accidentally cut yourself. It is across the Victorinox line. That's just something they do with their blades. So they're consistent with it, but they could have gotten a little bit more out of that blade by putting it closer up. Now, how often do you cut directly up against the hilt? I would say 0% of the time for me, because none of my blades allow me to do it, but it is something to consider with that. The last thing I think I failed to cover between the two is, again, a return to quality. This one I want to say is like $30 sometimes on Amazon, and you have exactly 0 creep in that pivot. Oh man, and listen to that. So they spring shut on their own. They snap into place. And I will say that I've been carrying this guy for about maybe 2 years, and it was purchased used off of Amazon, off of eBay. And I don't know what its service history, what its lifespan, how old it is. But compared to the new SOG, as I've said, you have complementary opening. It will bring tools with it. There is an audible snap. We'll listen for it. So there is an audible snap there. But as I've covered, I feel like the fact that the tools open with the one tool that you actually want defeats the whole notion of it being a locking tool. So you saw what I had to do there, and I feel like I already covered this, so fast forward if you want to. But here we go. When I open this, I have to open this. Then I have to run my fingers along the edge of that blade to get all the rest of the tools to snap back for it to click into place. Or I have to open that partially to close these all the way, to open this all the way, to have another one open, to have to push that. It's sold as a benefit. I see it as a safety hazard. I may have cut myself twice with the Victorinox in 7 years of relying on them full time as a third hand. Versus this guy, I haven't sliced myself because I'm not a retard, but there's a couple of these tools, especially as I covered in the last one, as I'm trying to seat this onto a belt, as I push down, this will open, and more often than not, probably 5 times, I've stabbed myself on the fingers as this opens just enough for this to be pointing up, and it didn't puncture, it didn't draw blood or anything. It left me a bruise and memories and something to put in a YouTube video, but it just seems like the engineering, the thoughtfulness, considerations just aren't there. Another thing, and I don't know how well this is going to show, so I am going to bring in some auxiliary lighting that apparently the kids got to, so bear with me here. If we look at... This is my pointer for now. If we look on the spine of these tools, you're going to see almost serrations. I mean, they're machine marks. And let me see if I can do better by you guys. That's better. So you can see, what's the best angle? I mean, this one is a file, and you would think that you would see a file surface on a file, which you do. But even on the backing of these guys, you can see very small micro scoring. And again, it's the fact how it was cut from the metal, I would assume, and they didn't even bother slicking it up before putting it in the tool. You could also see down here a little bit. It's not smooth. This one is, but I imagine this is stamped versus these that are forged, possibly. I know nothing about fabrication, but even here, let me do this one. You can see quite clearly a lot of tooling marks is what I'm going to call them. And as I run my knife across it, you can hear it. You can certainly feel it, but you can hear it. So they're little micro scoring, micro grooves, tool marks, less than confidence instilling. You have a very obvious seam right here, so much so that the tool looks like it's split in two, and it is raised enough that it doesn't catch, it doesn't stop on my poker device here, but I can feel it translating through the tool. If we look across here, you can see the cuts are not level. It almost looks like a, I could make a joke, but it almost looks like teeth on a human that have not been maintained very well. So you have some that are proud and some that are recessed, and even across the tool set here, I don't know how well it's going to show up, but this one is more recessed than the scissors that actually sit proud. They were put together in a fashion that allows for function, I guess is the most polite way I can put it. And I suppose the last thing I've noticed is, even when folded up, we've already talked about the fact that there is slop and wiggle. Wow. Prominent wiggle in those hinges. Even when it's folded, if I push on this outermost tool, I don't know if you can tell, but even the flathead here, 2 tools in, is swaying with me pushing on it. So they did what they could to shim it, to account for the slop and the, we'll say, lack of quality control. But it doesn't instill confidence. Does it affect anything? No. Will you notice it? No. How do I know that? Because in a month, I haven't noticed it. But I can't even push on any of these tools. I don't know. Let's try this one. The tool itself barely flexes. Now, to be fair, and again, back to the engineering thing, that you have the surface area of a AA battery that the pivot point is pivoting on, right? So you have a lot of surface area to prevent it from slopping quite so much. These, you have a much smaller pivoting area that are poorly engineered and worse, shimmed. Paint's already peeling off. I don't know. If it's a first multi-tool, it'd probably be sufficient. If you have to have pliers and a functional blade and very little else, you could probably just buy those 2 implements separately. The promise of an 18-in-1 packaged multi-tool that does it all, it falls flat. It will continue being carried in a kit. I don't know that it will be on my person. It doesn't. It's a double-edged sword between what it is and isn't capable of. I feel like I've covered in excruciating detail, and for those of you who have stayed, I do appreciate it. Hopefully, you learned something. But it's a compromise between what you need it to do and what the tool is capable of. I've shown you what it's capable of. The tool sets are all compromised either in reach, cutting ability, leverage, even compared to the keychains. I just feel like it's not there. Now, if this is the package that you need and you don't see yourself opening a lot of cans, which, to be fair, we have dedicated can openers now, and you're not going to be relying on a file to be shaving off, high tensile steel and blah, 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 blah. Maybe this is a good tool set for you, but understand in just a month's time, the tolerances that were there have opened up. The slop that wasn't there has presented itself. The finish that was applied has unapplied itself. It's been a month. I feel like there's less wear and tear on my 6 now years of service Victorinox that was also used and came from a unknown history of unknown usage than a brand new out of the box Chinese made 1 month of service multi-tool. So as I said, I just wanted to cover the bases. I felt like there were a couple holes in the video that I had released, despite how long it was. I try and cover a great many things on here. I don't want it to be smooth, crisp, and edited and, remove things that are behind the scenes. I want it to be a little raw. I want you to get the full experience of exactly what it is I'm reviewing, and I hope that shows. Speaking of showing, tell me in the comment section below, is this a benefit like that or like this? It's hard for me to tell. My biggest issue with using an LED light is typically there's a flutter or a flicker. I think they run at 60 or 100 hertz, something like that, and the camera shutter speed will usually pick it up. So if you think that adding this auxiliary light as opposed to just running this lighting is beneficial, and if it's beneficial, is it only when I'm doing a close-up for the camera, or is it when everything is sitting down on the background here? Go ahead and tell me in the comment section down below. I would appreciate it. While you're there, any questions, comments, concerns you have, leave them in the comments section below as well. Hopefully I showed you guys a little bit more than reviews or SOG's own website would lead you to believe about their, I won't say multi-tools in general, but I will say their power pint in particular. So that's all we have for today. This is Outside the Target Demographic. I appreciate you guys stopping by, and I will catch you guys in the next video.